Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. The City of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land and offer a moment of silence. Moving on to the approval of the April 22nd and May 13th, 2025 meeting minutes. Does anyone have any corrections to make? All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll move to approve the minutes as presented.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Okay, motion passes. Okay, are there any informational items from staff?
Sure. I just wanted to let everybody know that, as we've said, every single meeting that I've been in lately, we've got some summertime in Milwaukie. It's a beautiful time of year and there's lots going on. So, but the three things that I will highlight for this upcoming week is we got the Juneteenth celebration this Saturday at Ball Michelle Park from 11 to 3. And I hope everybody can get out and participate in that. And then we have got the farmer's market on Sunday. And then also we have something that's near and dear to our hearts, which we have the Transportation System Plan Open House, which is on Wednesday night from 6 to 7:30 at the Letting Library. So let all your friends and neighbors know that we're going to be talking about transportation. And that's what I've got.
What a great venue for that. All right, we move on to our audience participation section. Is there anyone in the room or online? Okay. We'll move on to our work session items then. Work session item 5.1, Affordable Housing Incentives Code Package. This work session item is a package of proposed code amendments offering incentives to developers to provide affordable housing. Senior Planner Vera Colias will present the information for discussion. So please begin.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the time on this work session. This is in advance of a future public hearing to talk about this code amendment package related to affordable housing incentives. And Laura will talk about the first couple of slides to set the stage for this package.
Yes, so back in 2023, the city adopted a housing production strategy, and that is a requirement by the state, and it's great because it really kind of gives us a path forward, a roadmap for things that we're going to explore to try to increase housing throughout the city. And so one of the first things that we needed to do is we were going to talk about developing incentives for affordable housing. And so that's why we're here tonight. We also have several other strategies that will be coming your way through the course of the next couple of years. So look out for those, but this is the kind of the start of that work that we should be, it'll probably take us the next 2027 before we get through the work. So yeah, this is the first of that. And so this one is looking at looking at our affordable housing code and what we had before and making sure and reevaluating that to see what we needed to do. Were we getting it right? We talked to some developers. We talked to city council over the course of 3 sessions before we came here. So we're really trying to build in some incentives that might get us some more affordable housing in the city. That said, it's all kind of, we hope that we'll get it right. We may not get it perfect. This is kind of our first shot out of the gate to kind of start getting in that direction, and we're going to monitor it over time and make adjustments as we kind kind of learn more about whether or not the code's going to work for us. And so Vera is going to take you through all of the details of what the incentives are proposed to be.
Great, thank you. Okay. So again, this is a code-based approach to address housing supply and affordability. We do have funding programs that provide actual financial resources to developers through our CET program, through the community development, through the economic development, and our housing development section that's run by Joseph Brilio. But this is intended to be, how can we use the zoning code to help incentivize affordable housing? The idea is to consolidate all the incentives into one new code section, 19.511, and it applies to middle housing, mixed-use residential, and multi-unit developments is the applicability of the project. And again, as Laura mentioned, we had 3 work sessions with City Council trying to tweak through this language, so we're here to get your feedback in advance of the public hearing for the actual code adoption process. So the first part of the code package or the code amendment section talks about what do you have to be a qualifying development. So first of all, making sure that you're either a multi-unit development, mixed-use residential or middle housing. And now here we get to that affordability targets that we want. So to be a qualifying development, the project has to be designed and constructed to these affordability levels. So at least half of the units have to be between 60 and 80% of AMI. So those units are income restricted to income restricted households, meaning that 60 to 80% of area median income or below, or 40% are at 40 to 60% of AMI. So you can kind of see how it's scaled, fewer units, but more affordable. 30% of the units to be at 30 to 40% AMI, or 20% of the units to be at less than 30% of AMI. So that was sort of the range, the idea that we were trying to get to target some of these income levels for the units. If 100% of the total number of the units, so not just a percentage, but actually all of them are at 80% or below, then the idea is that the incentives are then increased by an additional 10 percentage points. So we're trying to target the incentives in multiple ways and seeing if we can get a fully affordable project, then you get even more of a bump in the incentives, and that we'll go through in a second. And if 100% of the total number of units are ownership units. So again, where the City Council really wanted to try to incentivize home ownership units, which can be a little bit trickier than rental development. But if there's a way that someone can do 100% of the ownership units, then those incentives are increased by another 10%. So it sort of is building on itself to try to get to that. We do have an ownership project right now that's under construction. It's the short stack 15-unit cottage cluster development on Harvey Street. Those units are, all of them will be affordable at 80% or below the AMI is that target for those. As an example, it can happen. It's rare, but it can happen. Okay. We also are talking about the kind of the idea of continued affordability. So there's a section in the code that talks about that the application has to include the procedures that are proposed by the applicant to make sure that the continued affordability of those units for a minimum of 99 years for rental units and a minimum of 60 years for home ownership units. And those are targeted, as we understood it, to kind of the standard for HUD requirements for ownership over the long term. So the list of incentives. So the idea of this code package is that someone could package up to 10 distinct variances. So the idea of the incentives is that it's a big, large variance package. Our current code allows you to have up to 3 variances in one variance application. And the idea here is that you could package up to 10 distinct ones. But as an example, if someone needed a side yard setback reduction in 3 different places on the site, that's one variance. It's not each individual, it's sort of the side yard setback reduction, the height, all of those get packaged up. So it's a way of kind of consolidating all of these requests into one application. They would also all be reviewed as a type 2 application. So that's a planning manager decision. It's not a planning commission decision. So again, trying to streamline the review process. There is a review, there is still public comment, but it's intended to kind of help with some of these potential barriers to the physical development of the site. So the incentive list that we've come up with are reductions for the side yard setbacks, the front and rear setbacks with an additional reduction or an increased reduction for middle housing, common area landscaping and open space reduction, minimum lot area, so even smaller lots, minimum lot width and depth, maximum lot coverage, building height. So we're really trying to get to some of the things that we tend to hear that might be something that you might be able to expand a little bit and maybe even get an additional unit in a whole site if you were able to combine several of these incentives all in one spot. We also wanted to get a couple of things in the downtown mixed-use zone, where we normally see either the multi-unit residential or the mixed-use development, that there's a height bonus in addition to the allowable height bonus, so you could go even taller if at least half of the units are affordable at 60% or below of AMI. So the idea being that we really wanted to reward developments that were hitting sort of that lower threshold. 80% is kind of what we tend to see a lot of, but if we could target even 60% or below, you'll get an extra floor if half the units are there. So again, trying to kind of pull as many levers as we could to see if we can get some additional affordable housing in the downtown. Some additional incentives, looking at bike parking, which is we don't have vehicle parking requirements, of course, on the site, but we do have some bike parking requirements, so willing to reduce those as part of that. We have heard, or I know Portland did quite a bit of research on bike parking requirements, and those have been seen as something that they cost developments money, setting aside rooms and that kind of thing, so we can look at reducing the bike parking requirements. Again, building height, getting an additional story or 20 feet of height, increasing the density on a site. Middle housing isn't subject to maximum density, but multi-unit residential is. So this might be a way of getting more units in the same box of development. And you already saw that code amendment package that very small package that we brought a couple of months ago to be able to do that. And then again, we looked at our downtown code and wanted to allow for, if it's an affordable housing development, that we would allow for ground floor residential on some streets. We have a couple of our streets, particularly Main Street, you're not supposed to have ground floor residential, but if it's an affordable development, maybe we're okay with not having the storefront development right there. And then again, allowing some of that non-residential support uses on that ground floor. And we also looked at our townhouse development. Right now, our townhouses are limited to 4 that are attached. Then you need a break and then 4 more. And so we looked at increasing that to 6. So maybe a townhouse development might be able to take advantage of that as well. And before we changed the downtown code, this most recent go around when it was the big change, multi-unit development in the downtown was reviewed against the multi-unit design standards that are where it's reviewed everywhere else. The last round of downtown design, that code amendment package has everybody being reviewed against the downtown design standards. And there are some of those requirements that are over and above what the multi-unit residential requirements are. So we are proposing that the multi-unit development standards are what would apply to a multi-unit residential development as opposed to those downtown design standards. That maybe that's a way of reducing the cost of construction. There are still requirements for, open space, some of those sort of basic requirements, but some of the ones that the downtown design requirements are, those can increase the cost of development. And so we wanted to see if that might spur a little bit of affordable housing development in the downtown as well. Okay. And then a couple of the overall design standards that we have. We do have design standards for facade articulation, and that you would be allowed to ask for a full adjustment to those standards if it's an affordable housing development, and that you would need to only include a minimum of 3 of the detailed design features that we have for middle housing. Right now we require 5. We could reduce that to 3. And those are, as an example, horizontal lap siding, eaves, and window trim of 3 inches, and that gets you there. I mean, we have a whole list of them, but those 3 are we try to not be super prescriptive, and we allow people a menu of options, but there's a way to kind of reduce that number of design features and still ask for some basic design for those things. And then the total window area would allow you to go down to 12% for glazing on that street-facing facade. Right now, we require 15%. So it would allow for 12%, which is actually what it used to be when I first started here, and we bumped that up to 15% a few years ago. Okay. So the approval criteria. So again, this is a sort of a big package of variances, one application with a bunch of variances that you would need to, the approval criteria, you would still need to submit the narrative that talks about the type 2 variance criteria, which mostly talks about impacts to surrounding neighbors and any mitigation to any of those impacts, and making sure that your development doesn't directly impact an infrastructure project or something like that. But we added a couple of things to including provisions to guarantee that the dwelling units would remain affordable in the future. So making sure that you have the paperwork that would make sure that those affordable units are going to remain so, and that the income restricted units are reasonably dispersed. That's one of the kind of in the applicability piece of it, that we don't want all of those income restricted units to all be on one floor or in one part of a building. The idea is that they're dispersed throughout the building, that they have on average the same number of bedrooms overall, trying to make sure that they blend in, that it isn't really obvious where they are, and that they're compatible generally in design with the market rate units. So that's not really obvious that they're very different from the rest. Again, it's a type 2 review process. It would be an expedited type 2 review. Right now, the type 2 review, just like all of our reviews, has 120 days. There is an Oregon code section in the statute that talks about affordable housing development needing to be reviewed within 100 days. So that would, of course, apply to these as well. And our practice would be that they would receive priority processing by city departments for permits, including reviews and inspections during that construction process. So once you kind of get through all of that, we would be prioritizing that processing. Right now, it's a queue, and we do our best to kind of make sure everybody goes through everything in an efficient way. But to the extent that we can, we would prioritize that processing for the affordable dwellings as well. Any questions about the incentives, the applicability, any of it? Julie, you may have a comment or two, since this is what you do. But again, happy to hear whatever feedback you have so that we can refine this and bring it back to you during a code amendment process. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment, and we can come back to any of the list of incentives, but you all had it in your package. But let it rip. Let's go.
It was a rapid fire explanation of this. So if you have any questions at all, or if you want Vera to go back to any of the slides and go through anything, because we're living and breathing it, obviously. Yeah. We're deep in it, and I know you all aren't. So it's a lot to digest. Yeah. So, and any questions you have now, great. And then also we're going to bring it back to a hearing as well. So you'll get another bite at the apple, right? Yeah, of course. Just caveat.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
The first question I have is on the home ownership that's 80%. Is that requirement going to be on title? Or is it just a benefit that's for the initial occupant? So
on title.
So when they sell, they have to sell to another household that is 80%?
Yeah, I think the idea was that, and I think we included some of the discussion here. So maintain the availability of the income restricted home ownership units over a minimum of 60 years. So yeah, so they would need to transfer. The idea within the code, and we work with Joseph on this language, that the developers would have to enter into a development agreement or provide legal proof of restriction or affordability covenant with the city to ensure that retention. That would include monitoring, verification process, all of those things, is the idea that would be the case, yes. So it would just be on that initial sale. It's kind of for the duration of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just have 3 questions so far. The variances, I'm curious how they're compared to like neighboring, like Gladstone or, like Portland. We are like obviously the first city out of Multnomah County. So I'm just curious, how do they align these proposed variances?
Right. So this whole package its inception started with Senate Bill 1537, which is a package of requirements, and it applies to all housing, not just affordable housing. So, and it's a limited duration statute, runs till 2032, that communities are required to approve developments that submit this package of variances. And it includes a lot of these, and they require full adjustments. Some of them are certain percentages. And what we thought we wanted to package this and provide even more incentives targeted specifically to income restricted housing. The Senate bill is for all residential development, period, basically. And so what we did was we increased some of these incentives. We looked at what we already have as our type 2 variances. So we already allow for some of these breaks on side yard setbacks and so on to a limited amount. We increased some of them. And then we added some more in there, like the open space. But a lot of the types of variances in here are actually taken from the Senate bill itself. So communities all around actually have to comply with that Senate bill already. We're not aware of, and we sort of asked, we send out emails to the planners listserv to try to find out if any communities had code-related incentives like this for affordable housing, and we didn't get any responses. Portland, obviously, they have funding, and we have limited amount of funding, but a city like us, we don't have a lot of money to give out to folks, so we're happy to provide the resources if we have them, through that process that the Community Development Department runs, but we wanted to see if we had code ways to kind of get some of these barriers out of the way too. So for the most part, folks want cash, which I understand, but if there's a way that we can make a development work a little bit better, this is all needs to be balanced against our tree code, which is not zoning code. And so that's a separate code itself, but hopefully tree canopy, a couple, 3 trees on a site isn't going to break the bank, and we can make that work, with the development. And there are some income restricted provisions within the tree code as well. So it's all sort of balanced. It's not, a panacea for affordable housing, but we're hopeful that it can provide a little bit more room to make a project maybe work a little bit better on a site if it's a little more constrained. But comparing to other communities, I'm comfortable saying most communities don't have a code-based approach to these kinds of incentives, and we wanted to give it a try and see if it would work for anybody. Yeah.
Perfect. And then just my last question, and almost like a comment, is in regards to design standards and those variances, I'm just concerned that we don't want to make too many allowances, especially on like the facade, like the outsides and window, because we want to make sure that there's not a stigma associated with that's affordable housing. Right. And, this is not affordable housing. So that's just where I caution like the exterior of variances. That's not, I know for us, we still develop at a high level, but of course. I don't know if all affordable housing developers would do that. So I just caution us on allowing too many variances on the exterior looks and of our buildings.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
Great work.
We did sit through a lot, hours and hours and hours with city council on this. So Vera's done a lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to present this. This is really helpful to see this digested in this manner and to help provide the highlights. I think you provided something that you're presenting something that has a healthy balance with a measurable impact for the city, but also a measurable impact for the developer. And I think that we want to strike those balances consistently, but we also want to be providing incentives that truly are seen as valuable. Right. When you see someone putting together a housing plan or a pro forma for how they want to, put a development, get it built, you want to see these incentives actually as like a line item where they're really seeing how it's going to affect the bottom line. or they don't really have as much of an impact. So I do see that being presented here, and I think that's really wonderful to see. It really seems like it's a meaningful reduction in barriers. I think we talk a lot about breaking down barriers, and it's kind of a buzz term, but I actually really do think that this is a meaningful reduction in barriers because of how broadly applicable it is. It's not targeting like one area of code. It's kind of letting you pick from what's going to work best for the different developments, and I think that provides a lot of variety and opportunity. I too think there is a balance to be struck with what the design ultimately presents to the community. And I think part of that is a stigma. Part of that is longevity. You know, if we're hoping these buildings are going to be standing for 60, 90 years, they need to, you know, because we want them to stand for that long because they have these requirements on them. 60, 90 years from now, having those requirements still in place could make a huge difference. So we just want the buildings to last. And part of that is having them be, beautiful enough, that they get a certain level of respect. So that's something just to consider. Now, a couple actual questions for you. So I just want to confirm, because the way that I was reading the documents that were presented, it seemed as though the requirement for the 60 and 90 years for maintaining the low-income status was only if there was actual money coming from the city. I think I've just read that completely wrong, so I just want to make sure that I'm getting that right. It's not just if there's money from the city, it's if any of these code amendments, or if any of these code variances are allowed, that it must remain low income for that 60 to 90 years, regardless of whether it's funding or not.
Yes, and I'm glad you asked the question because I can go back through and make sure that it's clear.
Yeah.
I do like a run-on sentence, and I may have put one in here. So it's developments receiving a direct financial contribution or other financial incentives from the city or utilizing any of the incentives provided in this subsection must maintain the availability. So it's kind of covering all the things. If you're only getting money, if you're getting some other financial incentive, or if you're using these variances, it's all there. So yes.
I may have read that too quickly. Thank you.
But I will rework that sentence to make it
Just to be, to make sure, because generally if something trips up one person, I assume it could trip up somebody else. Let's see. You noted that dwelling units to be available on the ground floor. This is something that I personally am very interested in seeing in our downtown area. I think it would potentially help us, vacancy issues. And I'm just curious is this the only variance that has been discussed, or the only avenue within which a variance has been discussed that would allow for housing units on the ground floor in, I would say, in the downtown core?
So right now on Main Street, south of Scott Street, ground floor residential is not permitted. The idea being we want storefronts and that sort of thing. But that's a development standard, not a design standard in the DMU zone. So what someone could do is request a type 3 variance from that development standard in the DMU and come before this commission to ask for that as a variance, if they, as a market rate development or something like that. So that would be the only avenue in the code right now to allow for that first floor residential.
Okay.
Yeah, under the current code.
So this would be new. Yeah. And then I guess the last thing would be, how were the percentages reached? Like they seem very, very hyper specific with, some of the percentages on the variances that would be allowed with things. How were those numbers struck? And you don't have to give me exasperating detail. I'm sure it was a lot of processing, but just to help us understand where some of these numbers came from.
We looked at what our existing code says right now and wanted to see, is that enough? Is it based on what our development standards already are? So, if we right now have a minimum side yard setback of 5 feet in most of our zones, or depending on lot size, and we're allowing for a 40% reduction. Okay, that gets us down to 3 feet. We think that's a reasonable setback to still, from a building code standpoint too, for firewall, say if you want 3-foot setbacks. We also, so we kind of went through what we already have. We also looked at the Senate Bill 1537 to look at what their percentages were too. And in some cases, ours were already higher. So we felt pretty comfortable with that. But they had suggested, for example, that common area, minimum landscaping, open space, we don't have that in our type 2 variances right now, but the Senate bill did. So we pulled that over. We think, okay, that's probably something that we want to take a look at. And we looked at that reduction, 25% seemed like a good number, but we have upped it for middle housing, except for cottage clusters, because that's kind of the point of a cottage cluster is to have that. So we wanted to increase that incentive a little bit more on our own. So we kind of, there was some math involved, but it was also kind of just sort of our own kind of what we think best practice might be and what might work on a site. So yeah, there wasn't a ton of science, but we used some of our code and the Senate bill to kind of get a starting point and see what we thought might work.
Thank you very much for that. And actually, just one more quick question that I added when you were talking about something, you had mentioned adjustments. And I'm just curious what the overall process would be for adjustments if, it was found that maybe some aspect didn't quite hit the mark.
So if our numbers aren't right, or we wanted to change?
Yeah, if you wanted to make adjustments to some of the percentages or the specifics to, the code, do you have to go through this formal
We'd be
process
going
to make
right-
one small change?
Yes, we would.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
we would. Yeah, yeah. Which, we do this all the time. It's just kind of how it goes. I mean, a lot of these code packages, we try to get it right, but it's not until, somebody tries it out. And we're already seeing that with our middle housing. We've come back with a couple of tweaks because we realize we've talked to people, we think it's going to work. And then we have some folks come in with proposals and we realize, we could do this a little bit better. And so it's a bit of a process, but we're willing to do it to get it right, of course. So we're happy to come back and do this again if we need to.
Thank you very much. Are there any additional questions from folks? Yeah.
I'm just curious about the 99 years, especially since most funding that you get for affordable housing has 60 years. So where did that 99 come from? Because it's just a little bit more restrictive.
So that came from, we understood it to be used as a time frame as well.
I think that there was an understanding from Joseph's end, and he's the one who does most of the work in this realm. He said that there's been a bit of a shift to 99 instead of 60, which is why we changed it.
With funding. So usually you get money to do the more longer term. So that's where I'm just wondering if the 99 years aligns, since we're not giving a lot, we're giving variances.
Right.
So that's where I'm curious how that aligns. And if it's appealing to a developer, because it's longer than a lot of the funding requirements for like low-income housing tax credits.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. We'll bring it up with Joseph and see if we need to make any tweaks to it or if he can give us a better answer to your question. But yeah, we can bring that to you next time. Yeah.
If I could, just to jump on that a little bit, we had quite a bit of discussion with the city council about how to incentivize home ownership as a development type versus rental development. And so when we knew that, so 99 is a number that lives in this world somewhere. And so the idea being that, we want to use that number, but we'll use the lower number for the ownership units to try to see if that will incentivize home ownership. We were careful to try to not do too much code work related to tenure of the units, because that's a really hard thing for us to regulate through the code. We would really prefer the program requirements kind of suss out that timeline and the rental versus ownership piece of it. But the idea being that we would try to tie those timelines to ownership versus rental again. So it sort of added another layer, but that specificity of that the funding is tied to those timeframes, that we can talk to Joseph about it and see if that makes sense or how we want to do that. But thank you for raising that point. Yeah.
Got a few questions. I was curious on the maximum building height, noting that the height addition isn't allowed in the GMU zone. And I was kind of curious to hear more about that?
So, and this is a starting point. I'm certainly happy to have the conversation. Right now that the GM, this is a bit of a holdover from when we even created the GMU zone. And at the time, so there is a height bonus in the general mixed use zone, which is basically the central Milwaukie area. And at the time, that code was intended to kind of mirror in several ways the downtown mixed use zone for heights and so on. But at the time, the planning commission, actually, the membership at the time, we're okay with the height bonus, but they added in that you actually, if you were going to use the bonus, you needed to get a variance to do it. It's awkward, I'll just say that. But so to some degree, the GMU zone was sort of called out as being different from the downtown mixed use zone. And so we kind of continued that forward, given sort of the legislative history of the GMU zone. But as an example, the GMU applies to a portion of the hillside development, which is under construction right now, so that part of it. But it does apply to the Murphy site, which is just south of that. So that vacant 7-acre parcel that's just south of the hillside property at 32nd and Harrison. And then it, of course, and it would also apply to the Monroe apartment site, which is already developed. So the Murphy site is really the GMU kind of property that is kind of ripe for redevelopment at that point. But if that's something that the commission would like to suggest, that we kind of strike that the GMU would also be, could include that height bonus, we can certainly make that change and bring that up as part of the code amendment package. But it was more of a legislative history kind of.
Yeah, thanks for the history, because I wasn't totally necessarily tracking that, so I appreciate it. I guess I'd be interested in how other commissioners would feel about potentially striking that. I think I was kind of trying in my own mind to kind of understand why we were thinking about GMU different from DMU. So the background is really helpful there, but yeah, I don't know where others would stand on that topic.
Yeah, I think I'm for that. I think it makes sense. And, you know, specifically with the Murphy site and thinking about the development potential areas. Yeah, I think that's quite practical. That's where we want more of these hubs when we talk about more density outside of the core downtown.
Maybe continuing on the building height bonus, was also noting downtown mixed use. This bonus is in addition to allowable height bonuses for developments where 50% of the total proposed dwelling units are restricted to households earning no more than 60% AMI. And I was kind of curious, why 60? Where can you share more on kind of the discussion on that? You could have went higher, you could have went lower.
Going higher was sort of a non-starter at the city council. They really wanted to incentivize lower AMIs. 60% was kind of this number that seemed like a doable AMI from a development standpoint. The lower income you go, the more difficult it is to develop. And I'm looking at you, Julie, maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but yes, so, right. So the idea being that I think the idea was that 80% and up feels a little more market rate-ish, I guess, and sort of trying to be able to reward the lower AMI, but that's still kind of an AMI that could still get built. Because I think, I think we were really trying to balance, yes, we want some lower income AMIs, but we really want these projects to happen as well. And 60% seemed like a reasonable place where a development might actually get built with that additional.
And I can just add that that like 60% is tied to low income housing tax credit funding. And so when you're submitting your application to Oregon Housing and Community Services, that's where you get more points. So you get more points if you do 30%. So it's kind of like how you can make your project work, but they're usually tied to 30, 40, some 50. 80 is more favorable to a developer and you don't get as many points for those buildings. So there's little boxes you have to check when you're getting your funding, and this seems to match what those requirements are for the low-income housing tax credit.
And so on this height bonus, how does this interact with, in the DMU, we have 2 other height bonuses that are available. I believe it's a floor of residential can unlock an additional story, and then there's also the certified green building. So this would be in addition. And so for those other 2 bonuses, do those also, though, require a variance in order to get those? No, so those are kind of by right? Okay. I think those were kind of maybe my questions. I will echo, though, what Julie said earlier about maybe being a little thoughtful on the facade variances. I think we all enjoy a nice looking downtown, and I think we want to maintain some of those standards while also not having some buildings looking, potentially over time more roughshod or anything like that, so.
Circling back to height real fast, with the existing height bonuses, if a building were to have 100% low-income units, are there any provisions for additional height bonuses, or is it capped at that 1-story bonus?
That's the bonus.
Okay.
That's sure, it's cumulative, but it's the one kind of for that, yeah.
On the ground floor residential and the downtown mixed use, I think maybe I'm on the opposite end of where you're at. From my perspective, if we look at kind of the economic growth we've seen downtown, we've seen vacant spaces being leased out to businesses. We've seen office or even storage, ground floor office and storage being converted to commercial use. And we see a more lively downtown. My concern with adding the residential spaces specifically on Main Street, I think the secondary streets, I'm in favor of that. But on Main Street, I think if we want to continue to see the economic growth, I think we kind of need to have this commercial use staying there. Otherwise, we're going to have this, I'll say dead zones where we have the residential units where there's not much happening there, and we kind of see a natural draw to either end or to other areas. We need the residential units downtown. There's no way to argue against that, but I think we do need this ground floor retail, at least on Main Street, from my perspective. Or maybe a certain section of Main Street, like if Scott Park or Scott Street is the delineation point right now. Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to, and I don't know how you would do this, but to build in a variance of providing, if you do have commercial space, if you have affordable rents for a commercial tenant, you could get some additional points. Because some of the commercial space around here that have affordable housing units above, it's just really not affordable for small businesses to rent. And I know that from experience because my husband has a barber shop, that you can't really do small businesses. You have to have so it would be, I would have to think of the mechanics of that. I know that in affordable for us, when we're developing, we don't usually pro forma the commercial space rents because it's up and down, right? And you don't want your project to tank under some vacancy. So I think it's actually kind of doable to kind of put some kind of restriction on that if you do allow the commercial space on the ground floor. Just something to think about.
I think there's a good point to be made that we do want to make sure that we have a viable economic core on our Main Street. And I think that does need to remain focus for the community. And I think it does, like within our overall planning structure, it's very much geared towards that. I think the reason why I'm more open to the housing, I think, than I probably would have been even a few years ago, is just seeing the amount of vacancy. Specifically, I think thinking of like Axletree, how it's, I would rather have somebody living in that spot than nothing. And I think just the way that in some ways, thinking about how economics are shifting, the economics of actually having a brick and mortar store, like there's only so many types of stores that actually, fit well within our main street anymore. So I just think, I'm not necessarily saying we should be transferring all of our commercial, space to residential. And I also think this is only going to be utilized in a very specific way. I don't think it would be like a flood of residential units on the first floor. But I like the idea of just having another avenue so we don't necessarily get more housing that has commercial just to have it if there isn't the demand for it.
Yeah, I think the commercial space is a finite resource in downtown. And so, for sure, we're not going to have 6 blocks developed all into residential all at once. That's not realistic. I think it's just something to consider. Maybe there's a balance with live workspaces or, something like that. But my concern would be, even if we had a whole block developed, I think that could be detrimental.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in +1 Vice Chair Graytrick's comments, because I think considering the economics, and I know we're not talking about code overall, but I will for a second and say maybe we should be thinking about in the DMU allowing regular residential on ground floor. Because I agree, I think the economics have changed. Understand that, yes, there's only so much commercial space, and at the same time, I think we have more than enough of it right now is what the market shows, and we could always change code again. But no, we're not talking about that broadly, but I also do, Nick, like your thought of, maybe a limitation on Main Street proper as opposed to the others. I think that could be a really interesting kind of middle ground.
And I'm kind of agreeing with Nick on, I don't think we have enough commercial space that's affordable. I think we have, like Axletree's, that commercial space is not affordable. That's why it sits vacant. There's not a lot of space for a small business to enter into our community because it's either too large or it's too expensive. And so we're not seeing that. I'm continually amazed and hopeful that Good Measure continues to thrive because it makes me nervous. And I've done a lot of unofficial market research of the commercial space in the downtown, and the ones that are vacant, they're vacant for a reason.
Yeah, and I would just add that I've been actively working to lease spaces downtown, and so I know the market's there. There are business owners that are looking to lease spaces downtown, but it is an affordability challenge right now with some of the spaces that are there. Maybe switching topics here. Have we looked at any changes in code to the number of stairwells or elevator requirements? I don't know if we have the ability to override.
That's building code.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, there's a state building
Right, okay.
commission to talk to about that. This is just our little wheelhouse of zoning, so no,
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just want to say, just rolling back to the points that you are making, I think that we can go back and talk about this a little bit. I really think this is an interesting conversation that we should do some exploring, because we've had these conversations internally a lot as well about commercial space versus residential space and new spaces being too expensive. And we've had the same conversation. So let us go back and mull over and see if we can come up with some creative idea to address this question. I don't know exactly what the magic answer is, but we'll try to find something.
Yeah, and I would like to say I kind of agree with a lot of the conversation going on, especially if it's going to be, I kind of lean towards the commercial ground floor, at least like you said for Main Street. But if it was going to be, if it is commercial, I like the idea of having it more affordable. And then also, I don't know if this would be more expensive for developers, but I've worked on projects where the ground floor is kind of a live work situation where they kind of live there, but there's also maybe a little shop or something like that. And that might be more expensive to build. I'm not really sure, but I do like that option maybe. But but yeah, I tend to agree with a lot of the discussion where the commercial space is limited, I think. And so, but I do see the axle tree sitting empty. So that's not what we want. But yeah, I think, and thank you for the presentation, by the way. I think it's great. So thanks.
All righty. Are we good to go?
And with that, if there's no additional discussion. Wonderful.
And when are we bringing it back, Vera? Well, now we're gonna. July 22nd. Okay, so we're gonna try to bring it back to you on July 22nd. Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah. This is real, Vera. This is real. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we'll move to our next work session item, the Transportation System Plan Project Review. This work session item is a review of the Transportation System Plan Draft Future Conditions and Solutions Memo, including project lists. Planning Manager Laura Weigel and Associate Planner Ryan Dyer will present the information for discussion.
And then we've also got our consultant here, Matt Hugert from Kittleson and Associates. And we also have our city engineer here, Jen Garbley. We have been all actively together working on this all the time. So we've
Wonderful.
got the whole team here. Just wait to get the PowerPoint presentation pulled up. Commissioner Sherman, should we have a PSA about your school bus, bike bus?
I was gonna.
You're gonna do it at the end. Okay, I was like, well, we're in the interim. We're talking transportation, but okay. Okay, so what are we gonna talk about tonight? We're going to talk about the project updates. We're going to do a little recap of the methodology that we've got for developing the projects and the solutions that we identified through the needs and gaps analysis. We're going to do project review, going through all of the maps that we've got for you tonight. And then we've got the overview of all of the big push of our public engagement, which is happening in June and July. And then we'll talk a little bit about the schedule and the next steps. Matt, did you want to add anything to that? Sorry, I just jumped right in. Okay, cool.
Has everybody been for at least one TSP?
Has everybody been here for one TSP? Well, that's a good thing. It's okay. All right. So we've been working, I'll just give a little brief overview of it. Okay. Transportation System Plan. It's something that we're required to do by the state. We haven't really done a major overhaul of the plan since 2007. We've done some little updates. So we started this project, oh goodness gracious, many, many years ago. It seems like we got a grant from ODOT and back several years ago now. We kicked off the project, I think 2 years ago, right around 2 years ago. We went to city council and we developed we have a technical committee that's been working with us, which is made up of TriMet, Clackamas County, police, Metro, DLCD, and I think that's it. Yeah, so Clackamas School District, yep. So we've been working with the technical committee. We also have a city council appointed advisory committee made up of community members. We are, I think, on meeting number 9 with those folks. So every single thing that we've done, every step of the way, we've kind of met with the technical advisory committee, met with the community advisory committee, and then also done some public outreach at certain points along the way, and then come to the planning commission to give you all an update, and then go to city council to give the same update. So we kind of do this in sections, right? And so if you have any, there's a big, in your staff report, you can see there's links to lots of different things. And so where we are right now is we've been working for several years, trying to get to this point where we have, where the real exciting part part is what are the projects? What projects are we going to do? And so that is where we are tonight. And we can kind of give like a brief little overview of how we developed the projects along the way. And then I'm happy to answer any questions about the process. So we're kind of towards the end of this 2-year process. And so we're going to go through the projects and how we got there. Then we're going to prioritize the projects through a evaluation matrix based on the goals and policies that we developed as part of the TSP update, along with the Community Advisory Committee and Technical Committee. We're going to bring that prioritization list to you all next time, and we're going to talk about how those projects got prioritized. And we're also going to be talking to the community members about that. And then we will come back to you in the fall, kind of with the final plan, draft plan, and then hopefully the whole plan gets adopted towards the end of the year, beginning of January. That is in a nutshell, kind of where we are. Please feel free if anytime we're too much in lingo land, there's a lot going on over here. And so if there's any moment when you're like, hey, pause, what are you talking about? Just let us know, because you all are jumping in. There's been a lot of work done, and we'll try to do our best to tell you how we got here. Okay, thank you, Ryan, for bringing that up.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. Yes, please.
So I think just in addition to what Laura said, I think it's important. There are two things to keep in mind. One is that the state recently updated the administrative rules that govern how local jurisdictions update their transportation system plans. So we're all living in this new world and trying our best to work through it. And then second, I think just why this is an important plan is because these projects that will eventually be placed on, some of which will eventually be placed on a financially constrained project list. Like Laura said.
When you say financially constrained, what does that mean?
I mean, money, these are projects that we think in the next 20 years we will be able to pay for. In those projects are projects that are eligible then to be placed in our capital improvement plan, which is our shorter term 5-year plan to actually build capital improvements in the city.
But the projects that you will see tonight are not the projects that are on that list. There's a list that means that we have the money, projected revenue over a 20-year, and then there's a lot of projects that don't fit in that. Because as a caveat to all this is that right now we have $20 million over the next 20 years. $20 million, 20 years, that's $1 million a year. That's not much. So that's kind of where we are. But if we don't have projects on the list, then we can't go for grants. We can't kind of reach out for the opportunities that we see. So we just have to get all of the projects on the list and then hope to find the money to pay for a good chunk of them or some of them. Yeah.
Yep. And beyond being fun to daydream about all these cool projects that we could do, it's also part of those new rules, those administrative rules. We have to sort of create this robust inventory. Yeah.
Thank you for that as well.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Matt.
Okay, good evening. Matt Hugart with Kittleson, leading a larger group of consultants helping with the project, but I'm here tonight to kind of walk you through what we've been up to since, 3 months or so since we last met? Maybe something like that. Yeah. So real briefly, the last time we met, we were talking about what we called needs and gaps. It's basically we were first of all, we were inventorying the system to know where we had deficiencies and where we didn't have deficiencies. And we were creating a process to identify how to fill those gaps with projects. So I guess very briefly, a couple of kind of targets the city has set for itself over the course of this project is to build facilities that meet a certain standard or criteria. One of those, or actually two of those important criteria were based on sort of the quality of the pedestrian environment and the quality of the biking environment. So what we were trying to do is identify projects to fill those gaps that would meet a particular standard. So one of the things where you'll hear the term pedestrian level of traffic stress and bicycle level of traffic stress. Those are some methodologies that determine how well various user groups find themselves from a comfort perspective on those facilities. So if you've got Lake Road with a curb-tight sidewalk and fairly high travel speeds, it doesn't really matter who you are as a pedestrian, you're not really going to feel very comfortable walking on in that kind of environment. But if you get onto Linwood, for example, and you got a kind of a separated pathway with a vegetated buffer between you and the adjacent travel lanes, you're going to feel much more comfortable. So we're striving for that much more comfortable type of infrastructure improvement, and both on the pedestrian side and the bicycle side. So a lot of the projects that you'll see here tonight are the project team working through this process to try and achieve a certain level of infrastructure to make that comfort level more enjoyable and appealing for the variety of and majority of user groups that exist in the city. So that was kind of where we started. The products and the projects you see tonight is the outcome of that effort. So in a nutshell, anything else you want to add to that? Okay. So we'll have a lot of steps that were taken in between. I summarized that really briefly, but a couple of things, and we can go to the next slide, we'll talk about is this methodology. So how we developed the projects, it really started with, as I mentioned earlier, identifying the gaps. So a gap can mean anything from you physically don't have a sidewalk on the side of the road, or that sidewalk is pretty narrow or crumbling, or it's too close to the travel lane to make it comfortable for most pedestrians. So we found out where the gaps are. And then we developed this project based on these criteria and our different types of pedestrian or bicycling facilities. And that was based on that pedestrian level of traffic stress or bicycle level of traffic stress standard that we had established. So that was the first two steps. The third step is we looked into your old TSP or existing TSP and found all the projects that had previously been identified that hadn't been built yet, and kind of reevaluated and reestablished the veracity or the ability for those projects to remain, in this list of projects to consider. And then we started to just sort of look at them and evaluate them and modify them according to the feedback we had received on the technical committees, the other feedback we had received from various public engagement efforts. So that's kind of where we stand tonight. Is now we've got a methodology in place. We've got a project list. Let's share it with you. So we'll go through this as quickly as we can. There's a lot of stuff, but if you've got particular questions on individual projects, we'll go through them by mode. We'll be happy to talk to you about them. There's several hundred projects to go through, so we certainly won't be able to go through every one of them tonight, but we can hone in on the things that you have questions about. So, yeah. So the big modes, bike, ped, freight, transit, and roadway. It's kind of the types of projects we've kind of put them in those bins. So we'll try and break them apart in that frame of mind. Starting with pedestrians. So the image on the left, and this is in your packet, so you have a lot more information to look at, but the image on your left is an attempt at this point in the project to create a pedestrian classification system. So what city staff and the consultant team did is we looked at all the streets in the city and tried to break those streets down by the priority of pedestrian need or environment. So the map on the left is our first cut at trying to create a brand new pedestrian classification system. City didn't have one of those before. We had only classified the roadway network. Now we've classified those pedestrian networks, and the pedestrian environment is kind of focused down on sort of regional pedestrian travel and then kind of local pedestrian travel and everything in between. The map on the right is a product of that needs and gaps analysis where we kind of overlaid the analysis on top of the network. So it's a long way of saying, if you look at that map on the right with all those blue areas, the blue shading basically represents the overlapping of priority focus areas for the city. So they include things like schools, parks, transit stops, the town center, libraries, and other kind of institutional settings in the city. The darker the blue, the more overlap you have in those settings. So you can kind of see where those concentrations of key focus areas are. Using that concentrated map of key focus areas, we started to target where we can where we should identify how to fill in those gaps, if that makes any sense. So as we look further into the next map, then next slide would be the product of that effort. So every time you see a blue line or a green line or an intersection notation on this map, that represents a roadway that has a gap on it, either that's a sidewalk that didn't exist or the sidewalk that didn't meet our standard, and was in one or more of those priority focus areas. So this is a kind of a collective map that illustrates where those projects are located. And I think if you look at them, the kind of the colors in blue, they would represent an on-street pathway, kind of like what you would find on Linwood, where it's a physical separated multi-use pathway where you can ride your bike or walk. And then the projects in green, those would be a new or a improved sidewalk environment. And that could be anything from brand new sidewalks or taking an existing sidewalk and improving it somehow, either widening it or in most cases, removing obstacles or barriers on those sidewalks, such as utility poles or mailboxes or something else that currently exists and has a tendency to maybe block or limit the functionality of that sidewalk. And then the point projects in blue and I think it's kind of a purplish color, those are pedestrian projects located at intersections. So they could be things such as installing new pedestrian crossing treatments like an RRFB where you got those yellow flashing lights that help you cross the street. Or they could be adding in like a new crossing at a railroad of some sort. So that's kind of how you would read the map. And I guess maybe just at this point, I'll pause and see if you have any particular questions about any of these projects. I'm sure you do. So.
I'll jump right in. Thanks, Matt. I was really curious kind of in looking at this map and seeing Regents and Brookside Drive light up. I think it's project 48 and 49, kind of in the Llewellyn neighborhood. And if we go back a map, if you wouldn't mind, we don't have Regents or Brookside identified as having any pedestrian designation in the pedestrian classifications map. And I feel like we probably should. I think that where you all are identifying a project, there is probably a real need and we should maybe get it on the designated map. So I think just wanted to kind of see if, if there was any discussion on that or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I think in these particular examples you're bringing up, these were actually projects that are on your current TSP.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't want to discount them. And I think we got some feedback both internally from our technical and advisory committees and from, just internal discussions that it didn't make sense to just drop them just because they weren't in one of those priority focus areas. They were identified previously. We brought them forth. This is a sort of a compendium of projects here. Doesn't mean we couldn't remove them if we wanted to, but at this point we've kept them in, we've evaluated them, and we'll probably find through that evaluation process, they're not going to stack up as well as some of those other projects that are located in those darker shades of blue areas. But that's what we've done at this point. That's the discussion we've had at this level.
Yeah, part of the reason I also wasn't sure was looking at the bicycle map, which is further ahead. Regents and Brookside are identified as bicycle facilities. And so I was kind of in my mind saying, well, why are we identifying them as bicycle facilities and not also pedestrian facilities? That and then seeing the project listed on the project list, that this was kind of what kind of overall called the question for me.
Yeah, understand.
Yeah. The other kind of questions on this that I had was maybe kind of how bike or ped projects might overlap with one another, and then how that might then play out in a ranking or scoring kind of criteria. So I guess, looking at the pedestrian project map, the crossing at Harrison, and I believe it's 37th. We've got, I think it's PED project 33 and 34. And this also kind of lines up with bicycle project 77, where I think we mentioned a crossing improvement. I know you all mentioned, just in the presentation mentioned like RFIBs and things like that. So I just was kind of curious to kind of understand broadly as projects kind of overlap, and as a crossing could be a crossing for a person walking, or it can be a crossing for someone cycling. How do those things interact with one another? And I'm assuming they maybe help it score better in the overall output.
Well, I think in some cases, yeah, certainly there is some overlap on a lot of projects. In fact, you might find when you look at these bike and ped maps that anytime you see a multi-use pathway showing up on the ped project, it also shows up on the bike project, recognizing it's for both. So we do have some purposeful overlap. I think in a lot of cases, a lot of situations where there's an intersection crossing project, whether it's crossing 99E or 224, certainly those projects probably are labeled more on the ped side, but anytime you cross a pedestrian, you're crossing a bicyclist. So we could potentially maybe modify the description a little bit so that it speaks to both modes, but at the moment we've been kind of more focused in the individual mode per that particular bin. But I don't think there was a purposeful effort on our part to be overlapping, and we could do that.
I don't know if you need to. It was just kind of, I was starting to see the overlaps in my own review, which is, I think it's helpful to see. And sorry, Laura.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, we've been doing a lot of cross-checking. Like some of the maps that are in this package aren't even updated from conversations that we've continued to have about making sure that if there's a pedestrian crossing project, that we also have a bike crossing project. So we're acknowledging on all of those places where we have issues that there are separate things, but they all come together in one big package ultimately. Yeah. But we wanted to be sure to have them identified in each of the mode maps so that we didn't lose sight of them. It's confusing, like how do you pull it apart and then put it back together? There's not like a perfect formula. So we've tried to do it the best that we can.
Great, thanks. And maybe my last thing on the PED map. I know that when I think it was the last time we talked about TSP, I had kind of a question about a pedestrian connection from Cheragino Farms to North Clackamas Park. And not seeing it in our unconstrained list. And so wanted to just kind of flag that as maybe something y'all could look a little bit at more. There's a few residents there that I've talked to who've asked about this, and I think we looked at it, and I think it was part of the development package that maybe the county has to build it at some point. And
or even the North Clackamas Parks.
I think maybe it was the parks.
I'll take another look at it, but great. Apologies, I think I maybe dropped the one.
Clearly you have more than enough work on your hands, so thanks.
Well, if we miss something, remind us, because we're constantly picking up things.
I have a question. It's kind of a gray area, actually, in this map. It's a white area. By Oakfield. So we have that looks like on the PED map, we're covering all of like where Oakfield crosses Lake Road, but that's a very dangerous turn around there where it goes up to Aldercrest. And I'm looking at where it's not Milwaukie. It's not Milwaukie, but it's actually, I mean, we're doing a PED improvement. And then we have outside of Milwaukie area of city proper, we have the MAC station on Park, right? And that is kind of a really, where people are getting off of MAX at the end, and then they would walk up Park and then down around it's that little turn. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't know the road, but it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous for both. Yeah, that hairpin turn. And we're improving it to this city line, right? But then what's the plan after that to build, like, is there some synergy we can do with the county to potentially take that sidewalk and that pedestrian access to where the actual max ends and make it more safe?
Yeah, we are, I mean, it's outside of our jurisdiction, so no, we're not doing that. But we do have Clackamas County on our TAC, and I think that there will be also, they're getting ready to update their TSP as well. They're starting that process. So I'm assuming that somebody from the city will be on their technical committee, because that's just kind of the way it works.
Okay.
And so we can bring these things up when we are in conversations with them. So we could make a note of that in our own notes to be like, okay, we need to bring this up with Clackamas County when they start updating their
I think it's
TSP.
really important, especially since we're seeing that we're gonna stop at one point, like right at our line, but people aren't going to, because they're going to be coming from Max. And that stop is more convenient for people that are like on the Aldercrest side of the city.
It is noted, and we'll try to continue to bring that forward in our conversations with them.
I just have one question about the sheds, the walk shed and bike shed layers that you described, because I think I was having a hard time understanding how, like, the buffers formed. So you're saying it's where multiple, specific hubs, or like it's a park or a school that people might want to visit. But, and I understand that those are colored different ways, but how do they end up overlapping? Is it because they have a buffer around them and then those buffers are overlapping?
Yeah, so great question. I didn't do a great job of describing that because it would have taken really 30 minutes to go into it in great detail. But yeah, so I think of a point on the map. Let's just pick, say, a grocery store. That's one of our priority focus areas.
Like look at Safeway, right?
Yeah, Safeway, exactly. So what we did is we put what we call a quarter-mile walk buffer
Okay, so you
around
put
the
buffers on.
perimeter of that defined area. So we go quarter mile. Where can you walk for a quarter mile within that point on the map? And so every time you have, now grocery stores, there's only a couple in town, right? So there's only two. But if you look at, say, now neighborhood hubs, there's half a dozen of those. In some cases, those neighborhood hubs will start to blend in and then bleed in with each other, that walk buffer.
Yeah.
So that's where you take the neighborhood hub buffer, the transit buffer, the town center buffer, the school buffer,
Parks.
and then you parks and you layer them all on top of each
Hillside,
other.
Wichita Community
That's where you
Center.
get that darkest shades of blue, is when those layers are starting to overlap.
Got it.
And each of them has a quarter-mile walk buffer on it, so.
Okay, so it's a quarter mile.
So that's kind of how projects will get prioritized too, when you've got the dark blue, and then also how they are shaking out on the classification system list as well. So those projects will rise up to the top naturally.
One thing
when
I
we
just,
do the evaluation.
one thing I just want to note about that is I do think this seems, I don't know if it was on purpose or not, if it's just the nature of how our city is, but it seems like a lot of these projects are pretty well geographically dispersed. It's from a quality standpoint in terms of, equity. I think that it seems like that's really been thought about. It's really dispersed in a thoughtful manner. And I think I agree with Commissioner Sherman that I was starting to see a lot of overlap. So I think, from a financial perspective, wanting to have the maximum benefit for your projects, I think that's something that could be considered with the criteria. Is it helping multiple modes? And that could be considered like an extra bonus or something.
Definitely.
And then just echoing also the idea about this disconnect, where Oatfield, hits city limits. I know that it is outside of our purview. However, it is the best way for folks in pretty much anywhere not in downtown. It's the quickest pedestrian journey down to the Max stop. The Max, I think it's kind of unfortunate, we ended up kind of stopping it in this location that it ended up stopping in, but we really have to work with that location now and try to maximize it. And I think there's a lot of potential there. So it's just something to keep in mind.
One other thing on pedestrian projects, at risk of maybe becoming less popular with my neighbors, You know, looking at kind of the project list, one of the things that I kind of noted is, I think it's project 38. And this is Southeast Olson Street, sidewalks on the north side of the street. I'll note we have a complete sidewalk on the south side of the street, and there's other streets in the area that have no sidewalks and that are also close to the school. Filbert is an example. There's probably a few others. And so in my mind, I'm kind of like, why would we double up on a north side sidewalk, south side sidewalk on one street when some of the other streets have no sidewalks?
And I
So-
think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a SAFE project. So we have the SAFE projects identified in the list, right? So if it's already an existing SAFE project that we haven't done,
Okay.
we put it in there because that was something that had been worked on with the community prior to our process.
Well, prior to our process, that just doesn't necessarily seem like the best use of our resources. And maybe the decision was made and we can't unmake it. But again, there's other streets literally a block or so away with no sidewalks and just doesn't make as much sense. But
Yeah, and I think what you're pointing out that's a scenario where, yeah, you're right, there is a sidewalk on one side of Olson and not on the other. The sidewalk that is on that side of Olson, though, doesn't meet the target the city is setting for itself with that PLTS score. So that's one of those scenarios where we're not trying to just add a sidewalk to the other side. We're trying to boost that existing sidewalk up to that desirable PLTS2 target that the city has set. And that's the project. It's not meant to just put a sidewalk on the side that doesn't exist. It's meant to increase the quality of the existing sidewalk, so.
All of that said, Commissioner Sherman, I think that maybe projects, and I don't know, we haven't worked through this, especially in relation to the SAFE projects, because we've put all those on there. But maybe that's when we go in and we do the prioritization. We can say, well, we already have a sidewalk on one side, so maybe that doesn't get prioritized as high as a project, and then we focus on other projects that, yeah.
And again, I might be unpopular for saying this in my neighborhood, but I just felt like I had to say it, thinking about using our resources effectively around the whole city.
Yeah, no, great questions, and we don't take offense to any of that kind of stuff. I think it's the reality of, there's a lot of detail that went into these maps and a lot of other calculations, a lot of other factors. It's not readily apparent and something we can't really get into in the couple hours that we have here tonight, so.
And that said, I think I will just add that if you all have and we'll keep going through the rest of the projects, but if you go home and you look at this and you're like, I want to look at this a little bit more carefully, and you see anything that stands out or you want to just email me, and then we can kind of include it in the conversation. And then these maps are going to get refined also when we're going out, like all of the advisory committee members are going out to their NDAs over the next 2 months and showing all of these maps. And then we've got the big community outreach program. So these maps are getting refined on an ongoing basis. We're in that process now. Yeah.
Should we
So should we go on to the next? Yeah.
So the bicycle projects, kind of the rinse and repeat on the process. And so this figure 6 represents the bike projects. The kind of the blue lines represent a bike project where you would add a bike lane to a road that doesn't have one today. That darker shade of blue is the on-street bike and ped pathway. Those should be, and catch us if we're wrong, mirrored over to the PED list as well. So you should see the exact same multi-use pathway projects. And then the kind of the purple line is a recognition that that particular road probably is of a width, travel volume and speed condition to where we could formally designate that road as a shared biking environment. And you'll see a lot of shared biking environments popping up here simply because you have a lot of neighborhood streets, and a lot of neighborhood streets are of speeds and volume levels that don't require separated bicycle facilities. But most of those streets don't have any real formal signing and or striping designation on them to tell drivers, be more cognizant of the potential for shared travel lanes with cyclists, so.
I have a quick question on the project that's listed right for Washington Street. I know they're working on Washington Street and have been for the last year or so. So does this project that's listed on here, is that a different project altogether from what's currently being done on Washington Street?
Good question. We were just talking about that today because Jen was like, we're doing this right now.
That's right.
So the idea is that this project is that if we were going to ultimately build it out to ultimately a higher level or lower level of stress for riders, we would have another project, but we're not going to do that project anytime soon. So when we go through the prioritization project, prioritization analysis, that project will be at the very lower end because we will factor in work that's already been
just got
done, that's just been
facelift,
done, right?
for sure.
So yes, it is a project in case with 20 years out and we get all of the money in the whole world and we say we can build out the system, then we have the money, but this will not be a priority since it's being built right now.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I'd also even go so far as to say, if you disagree with the project that we've come up with, right? The description is, hey, why it doesn't make sense to do that? Why not this, right? I think we're still at a level where, that kind of feedback is still very helpful. And we expect to hear a lot of that from the neighborhood groups and from the public when we take this to them in a couple of weeks. So these aren't set in stone. These are just our technical analyses that we put into this to try and achieve that PLTS or BLTS target we've set for ourselves.
And I think the other thing though, too, I will add is that we've tried to be flexible enough because we're not in the design phase right now, right? So we don't want to say that we know what the exact solution is at this moment. So for every project that we do, we go out and we do a bunch of public outreach and we talk to everybody and we come up with actually like which side of the street might remove parking and which side might get the bike lane. And so this is kind of meant to be a flexible description saying that we know that there's something that needs to be done here. We need to have improvements, but we're not getting into the real specifics of it so that we have that design flexibility when we actually have the money and can go design it with the neighbors. Just a caveat.
The most, I guess, specific we've gotten on these is to place them into these sort of buckets that you see in the legend. And those buckets, we place projects into those buckets really to try to achieve, like Matt's been saying, that level of traffic stress target that the city has set for itself. So it's considering, what do conditions on those facilities look like? Meaning like, what is the, what does the actual roadway look like? How much traffic is there? What are the speeds on those facilities? And then taking that and saying, well, we set this BLTS or this PLTS target of 1 or 2, what type of facility generally would we need to achieve that target? And that's going to be maybe a bike lane. In many cases, like Matt said, maybe it's a shared lane, just with better signage or paint on the street to make drivers more aware of cyclists on the road, or it might need a actual separated facility.
And a lot of that also gets determined by like how much right of way we actually have to work with, right? Because in a lot of places, if you were building it from scratch, it would be a completely different situation, but we've got limited right of way. So then what is going to be the most appropriate treatment with what space we've got to play with? Yeah.
I've got 2 comments here. I think it's great to see the Railroad Avenue path. I think that is much needed and would be very welcome. The comment I have there is on Railroad Avenue, the pathways, and maybe it's a description right now and just a placeholder. The pathway is set for the north side, Harmony Road, the pathway is set for the south side. Having a disjointed path where we have one on the north, one on the south, coming together as a cyclist, it's really frustrating as a user. So I would just see if we could align that all the way through.
I'll just comment, the application we have in for federal grant actually looks at not just a multi-use path on the north side for that, but also a bike lane on the south side. And the reason for Harmony was we do already have a sidewalk there, and this was trying to add extra facilities. So totally understand your point, but it was a very high level and we could still flush out what that looks like. And that intersection is probably the most important thing that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which I'm trying to get a safety assessment set up with Clackamas County to start moving that forward. So a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
100% agree.
Yep, just calling or making a note there. And then also King Road, and so pretty much between King Road and 44th to 42nd, there's nothing noted there. So we have a really nice multi-use path that's going in, and then on the map here, it looks like it just dead ends into existing conditions. And there's a pinch point at 42nd and King Road from
We
a
just discussed that one
pedestrian
today.
cycling.
That's a mapping oversight, so we need to drag that blue line a little further to the west to fill that need. So that's something we just literally talked about a couple hours ago.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Okay. And then one more that just caught my eye, Harrison. So coming from Leading Library heading eastbound, it looks like that's a shared facility for cyclists. And then after you cross the train tracks, it turns into a bike lane. It'd be really nice to see the bike lane pulled almost down to in front of the Waldorf School. Vehicles are really,
Just said
yeah.
it today.
Awesome.
We've
Okay.
got this right.
You're so far ahead of it. Okay.
We're so in a line here.
Love it.
I will say that other comments we've gotten suggested not to put a bike lane on there. So there's a lot of, I think, opportunities or discussion that's being had amongst, depending on who looks at that project. And so taking all these comments into consideration will reflush a lot of these projects and regenerate new descriptions once we're past all of the info and data gathering from the public and from other committees. So.
But in
Yeah,
that
I-
one, probably gonna just, I think we have a shared vision
Yeah.
in that particular area.
Yeah, I think from an ultimate goal perspective, if we want to encourage cycling, we need to make it as convenient as possible. And so reducing zigzags, going through streets and using crosswalks to double cross to get across, or even having a bike lane, instead of a shared space where you're on a tight corner where vehicles are accelerating, as they come out of a downtown area. Just something to consider there.
I would like to see a safety assessment done all the way from 99E to 42nd on Harrison.
Yeah, and you're gonna do that, right? Or you've got a request in?
We want a grant, but we haven't received it from the federal government.
Oh, right.
So
We wanna do that.
want to do that, yes. Which would look at all of that from a bike and pedestrian safety lens.
Yeah, and somewhat on that point, I worry a little bit, I think to Nick's point about trying to make things as convenient as possible, that our central Milwaukie bikeway alignment, the zigzag to cross, I think it's at, cross Harrison at 35th, 34th. I worry it's not very intuitive. I worry if someone's coming from Minthorn Springs trying to head north that, for example, they're just going to want to stay heading north on the road that they are rather than redirect 2 blocks to then cross and then redirect back, and kind of same thing. And, I know I was on Planning Commission at the time that there's not a great set of solutions here. I know council at the time had their own opinions on this, but I think if we do kind of go with this consolidated crossing, and I appreciate at least what I'm reading from here about thinking about making that crossing really safe, because it is also problematic being on the downside of the hill or the top side of the hill. But I think we really need to think about wayfinding right around there to try and get the people to go where we want them to
That would be a
go.
critical part of it,
Yeah.
definitely, for sure. Because there's just some places where you gotta jig and jag because it's just safer.
Yeah, no,
But we would put in the wayfinding to say that
Okay.
this is the way to go.
Great.
Right.
I think you're gonna see an improvement of that as we get through like Monroe, right? And like how we are jogging onto Washington, because it is a safer route instead of just continuing on Monroe. And so how we wayfind that we're talking about right now.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that is an improvement and we can utilize those tools to help us with these other.
Thanks.
I think we've also talked about making sure that I think Councilor Anderson had a similar comment on 32nd, that intersection, and talked about adding a intersection project to the bicycle map as well to reflect basically, so for those cyclists like you're describing who are more confident and decide that they, are just going to go straight rather than head down 34th, that we're doing whatever we can, given all the constraints that exist, to make that intersection as safe as we can. So, yeah, note taken.
All right, should we move on to the transit? No, I'm sorry.
Sorry, one more comment. Has there been thought about extending the Monroe project a little further west to connect to, I think it's 42nd, just to try to make that connection into the neighborhood hub a little easier instead of having to go down to Washington and then you head north on 42nd?
Oh, to continue it on Monroe?
Yeah, so it's almost like a fork. So you have Washington. So if you're heading westbound,
We could add a separate project. At this point, I don't have enough funds to probably do it within the existing Monroe project, is what I would like, if there's a miracle, but that section is being authorized by ODOT and that price ticket keeps going up. But I think a second project would be fine to identify if we wanted to. Because I think there's at least a sidewalk. I can't remember.
there's a sidewalk for a block from
yeah,
42nd east.
that I might be able to pick up. But the bikeway part, I think we're still missing some bike lanes in that area too. It's only a section that has bike lanes, I think. And it's still missing a gap, if that serves me right.
Yeah, there's just a gravel,
Or is it just gravel at this
Yeah.
point?
so where that sidewalk is, there's like a parking strip, I guess you can call it, or parking lane. Yeah, no bike lanes though.
And I don't know if we have space to put bike lanes at the moment.
Well, I think it could be, I don't know
Just
how,
shared. I think the one problem would be the speeds in that area are higher because of the hill.
yeah.
So to make it safe, I don't know if I'm gonna, there'll be a risk there as far as that goes.
But we can add I think we can add a project.
We could add a project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have to.
Okay. I mean, this is that time. to
Yeah.
have a project. Yeah.
Just have a real quick one. I'm trying to wrap my head around the usefulness or what the, kind of why this, couple of these projects are here specifically along, is P111 and P72. They're rail crossings where it looks like pedestrians would be going from, both Olson Street, crossing the rail over towards McLaughlin, and then another one further north at, just north of Boyd, would be Roswell. I used to live on Southeast 28th, not too far from Roswell, and I can't imagine I guess, non-nefarious reason why somebody would go that direction. Like, why would pedestrians need to do that?
I was the one who brought up P72. I didn't bring up P111, although I've also jumped the tracks at P111. But P72 is a existing informal crossing right now. There's a pretty well-trodden path on it. Sure, Union Pacific doesn't like that. And so I was just suggesting I think it currently exists in the TSP as a project, probably more of a skunk works pipe dreams project. But was just thinking, if at some point we could exact something out of the railroad, maybe there would be an opportunity to make a safe at-grade crossing like you would see at 11th or 12th and Division in Southeast.
No, I understood. I guess I just don't understand. It could just be me because I'm not a biker, not an active biker. I just can't imagine.
You can get downtown.
A reason to go.
You get
Oh,
downtown really fast there. So rather than having to go south on 32nd, cross over at Harrison, down Harrison,
fair enough.
you can literally jump the tracks and be downtown in half as fast.
So this is why we have these discussions.
I have done this
To understand
too.
how other people.
For all the viewers out there.
Yeah.
I did it one time and Milwaukie police was on the other side of the tracks and then I ran back. But that's another story for another day.
Thank you for clarity.
I think P111 got added through the advisory committee, and it was just for similar reasons, convenience. And these got into the existing TSP, I think, through our North Milwaukee Innovation Area planning process, which really does envision that part of the city very differently. Having not just industrial uses, but also more mixed development, so including housing. So I think that was also part of that conversation about adding those crossings, is just thinking about a different land use context there.
Future planning.
Future planning.
Yeah. Two other things, and I don't know how it fits in the TSP, or if it fits. Maybe I'll start there. But in looking at a number of the bicycle projects, really appreciate seeing things called out about signage or striping, seeing some of those details. One thing that I don't see, and again, I don't know where it goes, is thinking about pavement quality and the surfaces. Seeing, facilities on here, neighborhood bikeway, by Water Tower Park, for example. And that is one of the worst places to ride your bike. You might as well be riding over gravel. It's just, and so, I don't know if there's a kind of like a package of TSP projects we could think about resurfacing or so I just kind of wanted to raise it as a question, because I think going back to other comments about wanting to make cycling convenient, well, you can have a paved road and you can have low volumes and you can even have some stop signs, but if the quality of the pavement is crap, nobody's going to do it.
So true. So I wouldn't be putting markings on a crappy road in that case, but I have started what's called a grind it in lane program. And right now we're actually have it out for a survey to say, hey, do you have a road? I'm looking for local roads, not collectors and arterials. That's on another program, right? That's in our SSMT program. But is there a local road that really should get a grinded in lane? That it should get a resurface type of deal. So I'm trying to gather that information so then I can put together a 5-year plan. And so that's what we're working on right now, and that's available to all community members to put into the survey. It's just like a
Engage Milwaukie. I think I
It's
saw
on
it.
Engage Milwaukie, that's right.
Yeah, so I know I just checked in, we're getting some comments,
Great.
but that's a great place to put it.
Okay.
That we can build this program, and we've been doing it for the last 2 years, and now I'm trying to beef it up to be a little bit bigger program, and so we're trying to get a little more.
Great, thanks. That's super helpful to hear. And now I'll go put some more survey answers in other parts of the city. The only other thing that I wanted to kind of bring up and was, I believe at our last planning commission, when we were talking about the bike classification map, a number of folks were talking about Southeast 34th Avenue, which takes you kind of up over the hill towards the Oatfield. I remember Commissioner Fuenmayor was talking about, as a local resident, that most people actually use 35th, just immediately to the east, that traffic volumes are slower. And so it was just kind of curious if there's a particular reason that we're sticking with 34th, or if staff and team would be amenable to a change there.
Yeah, I think we had that conversation following that planning commission meeting, and I think it was mostly to this earlier concern that was raised about just directness, that it was, and if you install the appropriate facilities there to make it more comfortable, that more people would use it. So I think that's kind of where we came down on it, but we're definitely amenable to.
I mean, I think if we're willing to make investments, then a more direct route probably makes sense.
Also a connection to Clackamas County's program, which is on Oatfield. So we're trying to also encourage that alignment with Oatfield along the way. So then bumping it around kind of makes it a little bit funky. So trying to encourage that with our partner, Clackamas County.
And until the meantime, until it's actually built out and better, they'll probably just keep using it on 35th.
And people can still use 35th. That's not a problem either, but we did have some conversations on what,
Yeah, no, thanks. It's helpful to hear some of the conversation y'all had.
And on that note, is it okay to move on to transit?
Yes, please.
Cool, okay. Fabulous.
So the transit projects, this looks a little thin. And it's not because we don't value transit in Milwaukee, it's just the opposite. It's a reflection of Milwaukee doesn't control what TriMet does, right? If TriMet decides it wants to add a line, TriMet adds a line. No, they don't do it in a vacuum. They obviously coordinate and work with their partnering jurisdictions. But this transit project map is a reflection of all of the currently known and planned transit line expansions and or additions. And it's limited to that. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not other projects in the transit list. This is just the ones that can be more easily mapped. But I would say what you're looking at here is reflection of all existing and or known transit expansion projects or visions that TriMet and Metro and others have put forth. And so that's more or less what you're seeing here. So.
Yeah, and both Metro and TriMet are on our technical committee. And so this map is up to date with all of the projects that they've got in the hopper.
Maybe just a quick question, and it's definitely not, or be on the very small capital side of things. But, with Hillside, I remember at Planning Commission, we had a quick conversation about consolidating bus stops. I think as, I travel kind of through the city, 32nd King Road, some of the bus stops are spaced fairly tight. And I don't know if that's worth talking with TriMet about at some point in order to maybe improve headways.
As we do a project, we talk about that every time.
Okay.
For Nation King Road, you'll see a little bit of change.
Okay.
As that's being updated with the project that we're
Great.
doing there. Because they usually need also updated infrastructure. So as soon as we're doing a project, they're like, okay, we're going to change what,
Okay.
What the stops look like and
Okay.
where they want them.
So it'll kind of be handled project by project.
It is project by project. Yeah.
Thanks.
Are there also TriMet standards that have to be met for how far the stops are apart from each other?
I'm not actually familiar with how far they need to be, but it's more
Or like a
what
maximum.
facilities we have at those stops that I'm really concerned with. And so they'll look at it, and if they've got too many stops, they'll kind of reevaluate. A good example is Harrison between the railroad and 224. We're actually looking at pulling that stop sign away from the intersection because it kind of creates congestion and pulling it closer to the church. So you're going to see that improvement actually done, I think, this fall. And it's going to consolidate. So instead of having two on that area, it'll be moved centrally.
That would be
And
great.
A better crossing is being installed right there at the crosswalk, which is going to help the church and the daycare as well. That has a lot of people crossing through there. And we're putting the bike lanes through there as well. So that's going to also change what that looks like right through there. And then moving that bus stop really away from 224 to help, get people on and off at a better spot.
And I think there is a lot of importance around the strategic nature of the stops and wanting them to be in safe locations and wanting to maximize the amount of facilities that are at them. But I think having a small child, I could appreciate not wanting to increase the gaps between stops if that's, in general. I think we want to try to keep those.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Closer
say
to-
a lot is moving from King Road. It's just more placing them in better locations.
I think that would
I
be-
think one out of all of them is going away and it's relining kind of where they're at slightly.
And I guess while I have the mic, just one more plug. I think that it's, I really like seeing the idea of having more frequent routes. I don't necessarily think we need more routes, but I do think that frequency is what makes riding transit seem more appealing to folks. The more frequent they can get, on and off, it helps line up better with their day. So I think that a priority over, I think new routes should be frequency. And then thinking about with ridership, targeting an understanding, of where we're looking at housing. and making sure that there is some, if we're pushing for actually new routes, not necessarily just frequency. I think frequency is helpful on all major roadways to be increased. But if you're actually going to put in new routes, I think there needs to be a thoughtful discussion and thoughtful looking at where are our new housing developments going. And I know that the city is considering that, but I just want to make sure that we're really emphasizing the focus on associating the transit with the housing.
I noticed in the future project map or route here that the circulation for the bus mall looks like it changed down to Monroe and I don't know what the street just south of the old city hall is, but it looks like that circulation pretty much shifted down south a block. Has there been any thought or ideas around if that bus mall is the best place for that, or if that should be shifted to a new location?
Yeah, that's a detail that I don't think anyone has thought about. I think a lot of the lines on this map is a reflection of the general expected routing of these frequent services or new routes, but it's the specificity of how they interact within a area like a transit mall. That's just our interpretation, and we can even, if that looks uncomfortable, we can even get rid of some of those nuanced details and show it a little differently. But at the moment, that's just us trying to interpret what we think it might look like. Because it's shown on the map, though, doesn't mean it might not change. One block north, one block east, things like that, so.
Yeah, just curious about making the connection, people getting off the max and then walking 4 or 5, however many blocks it is, just trying to reduce that connection and connection time. And then if we want buses circulating kind of in a very busy part of downtown right there.
We talked about that at our technical committee with TriMet, because there was a project in the former TSP to, I think, try to work with TriMet to move, I guess, or prevent or, to find a different location for the buses to idle and have their, I guess, layovers and change out drivers. And it sounds like we weren't, I don't think we had a deep history on where that conversation had existed and led to that project being placed there. And I think what we heard from TriMet during that conversation, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, was that they were potentially already looking at different options, maybe better locations for them to have their layovers. So it sounds like that is maybe a direction the TriMet is already headed on sort of their own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I remember that as well. Yeah, they're looking at that. All right, moving along.
I did have just one thing to add. I mean, as the resident non-car haver here, I'm really happy to see the additions of, or the proposed additions of transit lines along Railroad, and that there are things in the works looking at maintaining bus access along Johnson Creek, especially as there's been proposed changes to the 34 along that stretch. One place that I do think could be a good place to look at transit is Stanley. Because even if there were to be transit all the way down Linwood, there's no connection points from Linwood to Stanley in the Llewellyn neighborhood over there. And that's kind of a dead spot for transportation access. I suppose that's the end of my thought, but I've been kind of waiting for the day for it to come for a long time, ever since Balmichelle Park was built with the little bus shelter. Still dreaming for it.
Well, we can share that dream with TriMet and see how they react to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, roadway and intersection projects. These are combined. It's in recognition that, sometimes intersection projects are roadways and roadways are intersections. So it's just a way to minimize an additional map here. I think the majority of what you're seeing on this map here is a reflection of Milwaukie is pretty much a built-out city, right? There's not a lot of areas where we need new roads, right? We might need upgraded roads, but most of the grid and most of the roads are going to be, where you see them, that's what's going to be there. However, I think there are quite a few opportunities to establish new connections. You have a lot of neighborhoods with, more than a dozen or so locations where there's a street stub. That stub could extend with some longer term redevelopment of some of the properties. I think this is a recognition in a lot of cases of if and when there is redevelopment or turnover on properties, the city could potentially purchase and or condition that property owner to extend some of these connections that you see on this map. Now, a lot of these are aspirational, I would say, when you look at it. So keep that in mind. But when you just look at the grand, kind of the big fabric of the local street system, we've tried to fill in those gaps. And we've taken a careful look at this list and we've tried to whittle the ones down that have some potential over time. And some of them are pretty easy to envision. Some of them are a little harder. But I think this is a reflection of trying to establish those local street connections. There are a handful of others, like in the North Milwaukie industrial area where you see some new roads popping up. Those are roadways that came out of the planning efforts for the North Milwaukie industrial area, and we've brought those projects over into this fresh look. And so some of those projects are just carryovers, and we'll be evaluating those accordingly. So. Other than that, we can go into the details, so. Yeah.
Just wanted to call out specifically R22, I think is an incredibly valuable project. As was just mentioned, there's no connection. Currently between Linwood and Stanley, I have a family member who lives on Stanley and I live on Linwood. And so I found, or just off of Linwood. And I have found that it's difficult to find a good path in between with the lack of connectivity. And I think then if you were to have the bus line, going down Linwood, that obviously allows for that connectivity inwards. So I think just finding those opportunities where projects can be, it's one thing to say, oh yes, it's both a roadway improvement and a bikeway improvement because we're going to do things to the road that help both. That's a win-win. But there's also some where connecting these two roads can help get people over to the bus that's running on a different road. So they're not as obviously connected. But there could be a priority given to projects like that that will help bring more value to other projects. And also rather small projects. I don't know the complexity around the ownership of the land. I think that's definitely going to be a big part of this. I think this one, R22 lines up with a church. And I was looking at this one in an aerial and I was kind of curious if there had been discussions, like if is it just completely a theory? Like maybe we could do that, or have we actually thought of if it's really feasible, if they'd be open to it?
Good questions. Moving on.
Okay, just curious.
No, yeah, it's a conversation we've had a lot, especially I guess in this sort of eastern section of Milwaukie where you do have these sort of super blocks without a lot of connections for vehicular traffic or bikes or peds. And the challenge is absolutely that, that land is developed with housing and oftentimes valuable housing. And so, as Matt sort of mentioned, what it looks like to, add those connections in. It could be redevelopment of the land. It might be purchasing property. It's kind of I guess, situation by situation analysis. There have been some conversations about that church property, which currently, I think sort of where that aligns is a sort of a driveway that almost kind of extends all the way across. That seemed like maybe the best place that we could get a connection. There have been some conversations about maybe adding, very preliminary about, I think, people exploring adding housing there. And so that's exciting. But yeah, it really, it depends
Okay.
is I guess the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a proportionality thing to consider, right? So sometimes we can't actually, we have it on a map, but we can't actually get it because there's not the proportionality there, right?
With safety being a challenge at the intersection of Harrison and 37th, I don't see that intersection marked for a project on here. I'm curious what the reason is for that, because it seems like that has been talked about as a known issue in the past. That's at the top of the hill on Harrison as you head towards Safeway.
I believe it's the bottom of the hill.
No, at the top of the hill, there's a, as you come up 37th from Minthorn Springs,
Oh, yeah.
that intersection is kind of blind. In multiple directions, actually.
Yeah.
When you're on
yeah.
37th.
If you're on 37th heading north at Harrison,
Yeah.
it's it's blind to the left. For
Yeah,
sure.
even if you're heading south, same thing. There's kind of like a retaining wall and a hedge.
So is that sorry, if you have a comment on that one, but I was gonna say, is that a site distance limitation or is that like a geometric?
I think it's both sight and speed, just in general, like people speed quite a bit in that section of Harrison. But
Maybe a clear vision issue.
But it is a sightline vision.
It's-
But we got it noted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
yeah, and some of it's topography, like unless you're going to really change the road, you're not.
Yeah, we might.
We'll take a look at it and see if there's anything that's feasible to add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if, I don't have anything on this. I wasn't sure if we jumped over the classifications map real fast, but if we did, I'd love to kind of talk about it and float something for a second.
Yeah.
Is that, I guess I had a question as I was looking at the roadway classifications map about, Stanley has come up a few times, and I'm kind of wondering, is our vision in the next 20 years that Stanley remains a collector? Or should it be a neighborhood route? Should it be kind of downgraded? If it is on north and south, all the way. And it certainly seems like it functions one on the north side of King Road, but on the south side of King Road, it's pretty sleepy. And I think that it might be worth having a conversation as part of the public outreach to talk to Linwood Neighborhood Association and others to, I don't know if we should be building, making our decisions for that to be maintained as a collector when Linwood is adjacent and is an arterial. And, I kind of feel the same way on the north side of King as well, is our future vision for this to remain a collector, or should it be a slower, more neighborhood serving route? I know there's definitely folks in the Llewellyn Neighborhood Association who've talked about those kinds of things. And I think this is the space where we should talk about what's the future of these segments. And I think I would personally be supportive of moving them from collectors to neighborhood routes. But I don't know how others on the Planning Commission feel about that. And certainly we need community perspective on it as well as subject matter experts. I mean, you're building the system, so, I don't know, how you would think about it. And you don't have to respond to this today, but I just wanted to put it out there because I think it's something we should use this moment to ask a critical question like that.
It is one of those kind of verticals that's going, north, south through the city. Because we don't have a ton that cuts all the way up to Johnson Creek. I mean, you have Linwood and then Stanley, so that is one aspect we are trying to kind of like still have that mobility through the city. But if it's a collector versus a neighborhood route, I don't know if that's high enough, something to argue about as far as that goes. I am trying to lower lower the speeds on Stanley from Johnson Creek because it's 25, but people are going over 30. So.
Yeah, and I think maybe my question is like, it seems like we've made a choice as a city, as well as our county partners, that Linwood is the place we're moving most of our north-south traffic through. So do we need, literally a quarter mile away, another north-south facility when a lot of it's pretty quiet neighborhood streets? So I think that's kind of my own thoughts. I'm sure all sorts of community members, maybe even my fellow planning commissioners have their own thoughts, but.
Well, I just have a question. If it's down, I don't know if the word would be downgraded to a neighborhood, does that impact transit? And because we were just talking about potentially needing more transit on Stanley. So if you reduce it from a collector to a neighborhood, then what is that potential impact on?
I think the potential impact is you probably wouldn't see transit on it, but I think the reality is you probably won't see transit on it.
But if you do downgrade it though, then
Yeah.
it does take that,
Yeah.
that will reduce it considerably. It's a good.
Anyways, I think it could be an
We can-
interesting trade-off conversation to have with
We can talk
community
about it a
members.
little bit, yeah.
My main sticking point is just, again, the lack of connections to Linwood. So it feels very separate to me. As someone who grew up in the Llewellyn neighborhood, it's my arterial road. But I think other things to consider aren't two of our proposed neighborhood hubs on the north side of Stanley? No? There's the one by Paul Michelle and then Johnson Creek.
Those are very low priority hubs. They didn't make it into the kind of the first tier cut because there's not really existing anything there's very little that exists there that has to kind of grow. But so they didn't make it onto the.
I'm on outdated information.
I think on the south side of Stanley, specifically between Railroad and Monroe, where you have the lack of left turns from Linwood into the neighborhoods, I think I could see that. I mean, that's kind of a necessity to some extent. So there is quite a bit of traffic that's kind of channeling through that section from a collector point of view.
Well, we can continue. We can talk a little bit about it internally and see kind of like, it also has to do, I think, with what street treatments it gets, right?
Yeah.
The design treatments. So if it's a collector, there's one set of things, one set of treatments, and there's a little bit different set of treatments.
And if it's also, it is one of our bicycle facilities, right? And so if it's a bicycle facility and it's a collector, we're going to be like playing those things kind of off each other, maybe in a contradictory sort of way. So.
Yeah. We'll talk about it and see it come back with something.
Questions on the roadway and intersection list? Okay, I'll just hit the last one here, freight. So freight is, to be honest, I think pulling in a lot of projects that existed in the North Milwaukie industrial area. So that's why you see a lot of the concentration of projects in that area. It is, I think, a reflection of the detailed planning work that was done as part of that effort. And there are a lot of projects on there that were, I think, generated just to help the movement of the industrial community in that area. So there's upgrades to roads, there's better turn radii, requests and projects. So a lot of what you see there is a reflection of that. So.
Just want to mention like kind of the dichotomy between, in this northern industrial area, like different planning goals. If we're going to
bring connectivity to pedestrians, but we're also, widening things for large trucks, long haul trucking. Those are really just in a direct dichotomy to each other. I almost prefer the idea of not encouraging pedestrians to be on the same roadways that we are kind of enabling with better use for trucks. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. I know that a lot of this is different times where these different ideas came from, and they're kind of mushing together. I like the idea of keeping that more industrial area at the north, industrial. It doesn't have any trees. It doesn't have a lot that really brings pedestrians to
I think it's just mostly about the pedestrians that are there and wanting them to have safe places to be able to walk outside. The people that work there, that there are safe connections for them.
Where they would walk to, I think, is the thing that's confusing to me. Because I get them going south on Main Street, like going towards Main Street and going to get lunch on Main Street or something, and then walking back up. But it's just something to keep in mind, is the different uses in that area and competing needs.
Yeah, it's too bad that Vera left because she was really more involved with that planning effort. But as I understand it, I mean, I think you're right. I think there are a lot of sort of competing interest for that space. I think sort of the Central East Side in Portland and its sort of history as an industrial area, but it's, I guess, sort of transition in some locations to having more, residential and commercial uses that are desirable. I think that was an inspiration for that planning effort. I think that it was also inspired by the introduction of the light rail through that area, and specifically the northern part of the North Milwaukie sort of innovation industrial area has different zoning than the southern side that's more employment heavy. And I think that the vision for that, area into the future under that, plan was for it to continue to be sort of an industrial area. There are a lot of high value industrial uses there that are just also realistically very unlikely to transition over time. But yeah, so yeah,
We have multiple railroad crossing gaps highlighted and no projects tied to those. Any specific reason for that?
Maybe you expand on that a little bit.
So in the freight gaps and needs, page 49, we show Harrison Street rail crossing, 37th rail crossing, Harmony Road and Linwood rail crossing challenges, and then no projects associated with those. And those have been challenges since I was a child. So are we looking at another 15, 20 years experiencing the same thing?
I mean, I think this is, and yeah, y'all can add on. I think this is one of those challenges we've had where there are sort of overlapping other modal projects that are sort of trying to address these challenges or challenge areas. And we've done the best that we can to, I think, reflect those projects across different modal maps. But yeah, for freight, I don't know that this is maybe one of the more robust conversations that we've had through all the sort of advisory committees that we've, taken these maps to. This is one of the more robust conversations we've had about freight, which I think should tell you something. So it's a good point. I don't know if Matt, you want to add?
No, I think in some locations, if it's a rail crossing of a roadway, right, it'll probably show up more on the roadway projects than it would on the freight. I think when we say freight, trying to focus more on the industrial users that generate freight-related traffic, not so much rail traffic. So, yeah, it's just a question of what modal, where do we spread that project? Does it belong here? Does it belong on the roadway or intersection project list? If there's things missing, yeah, certainly let us know. If you feel strongly that it belongs on one or the other, we'll certainly take your information and go back and look at it.
So I don't see the Harrison Rail crossing on the roadway map or the 37th on the railway. I mean, we have a Railroad Avenue left turn queue marked, but nothing for the railroad crossing on the roadway map.
Yeah,
Good point.
that's a good point.
I was kind of curious on some of the turning radii deficiencies for freight. Was this, I guess were freight stakeholders part of pointing some of these things out? And I ask in particular, I was curious on like 17th and Ochoco, the Goodwill, how that intersection is for kind of the freight users, if you've heard any specific feedback on that.
We have two freight folks on the advisory committee. They have not participated.
Oh, okay.
They've only been to one each kind of meeting thing, so.
My understanding, a lot of these credits are from previous TS.
Okay.
And then,
Carrying forward. Okay.
yeah.
Great.
And again, from the NMIA plan, and I do think that there was actually a pretty robust sort of
Participation in
industrial
that.
Participation.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think that's where those came from.
Okay.
Yeah, that study for sure.
Which isn't to say that Ochoco and 17th doesn't have challenges that maybe were missed in that project. So.
So we need to go back and just revisit this. I mean, just taking a look at, I think that we had a couple of comments on the Harrison and 37th. And that it's on the freight, but it's not on the railroad. So we just need to do some cross-checking, I think, and some referencing and make sure that we understand what story is being told here and if it's still the story that we're trying to tell. If that makes sense.
Yep.
All right. Anything else on these? We're going to move on. All right, let's do it. Okay. So upcoming public outreach events. Just wanted to let you all know what's coming and also what we've done. We went to the Noche Latina event on May 16th. We've been to the El Puente PTO to pitch coming to the community open house. Ryan and I were at the farmer's market last weekend with Counselor Anderson, and people came by. We've got the community workshop next Wednesday night. We're doing 3 focus group meetings. We're working with our equity steering committee, our equity coordinator to organize a BIPOC group. We're also working with Hillside to do a focus group, and then with Wichita Center and Milwaukie Center to do a group. I'm trying to get at those underrepresented communities. We are paying folks and providing them food when it's during the dinner time. I'm also meeting with the Equity Steering Committee next week to talk about the overview of the project. Then Jen is not next week, the equity is 2 weeks, right? Jen is also meeting with the Public Safety Committee on the same night that I'm meeting with the Equity Steering Committee to go over the project list with folks. And then we've also deputized, I think I said this earlier, our advisory committee members to go to the NDA meeting. So they have a big packet of all the same maps that you all see today, they are taking out to the community. Putting them to work, that's right. We can only be so many places at so many times because it's just me and Ryan. And so we're trying to get other folks to help us out. And so it's, like I said, big push, June and July. And then we'll also be doing the Engage Milwaukie at the same time. So that should be up on June 18th, which is the same day that we have the open house. Yeah, that's what's happening for public outreach coming up. And what's the next slide, Ryan? Okay. Said that, said all that. So if there's anything that you all see after this meeting, just shoot us an email. Let us know if there's anything that you want us to think about. And with that, if we're good, we'll wrap up this portion.
Any additional comments?
I just want to say, as a new commissioner, this is the first time I've had to get to really kind of dive into this and read it. And there's a tremendous amount of information, so I really appreciate the depth that's in this, because there's a lot there's a lot of information and it really helps kind of, give you a good picture of what's going on around. So just want to say thanks for that.
Thanks for that. We appreciate that. We've been having a good time doing a deep dive. Lots and lots of folks. All right, cool. All right.
Okay, with that, we end our work session items for the evening. At this point of the agenda, the commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. Do staff or CIAC members have any items to report?
I do not.
Does anyone in the audience wish to speak with the Planning Commission in their role as the CIAC?
There's no one in the audience.
No one in the audience. All right. Okay, so now on to Planning Department Commissioner, other businesses and updates. Any commissioners have any other items for discussion?
I've got one. If any planning commissioners were interested, I, as well as others, have helped organize the first bike bus in the city of Milwaukie. This helps get children to Ardenwald Elementary School. A bike bus is like a school bus, except it's a bunch of people riding their bikes together to get to a place. So we're doing our final bike bus of the year. We've held 2 of them. We've had about 50 people show up. And our final one is Thursday morning. We're leaving 29th and Van Water Street, heading south on the Greenway to Olson, turning up Olson, all the way to 42nd, then getting on the shared road, which is a little dicey, but we take the whole lane and riding that to Roswell and then turning in. It's real good fun. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Hopefully we can use this to start more bike buses in the city of Milwaukie and take advantage of some of the great infrastructure that we have. Brings a lot of joy in the morning, the early mornings.
It's wonderful. Thank you for that. Okay, on to forecasting for future meetings.
All right, so on June 24th, the next meeting, we've got a community service use hearing. I will not be here, but you will be in trustee hands with Brett and Vera are going to be here running the show. And then we don't have anything on July 8th, so you can plan for that. And then we will have something on the agenda for July 22nd.
All right, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, is there any further discussion? All those move to adjourn, please say aye.
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 Any folks with nay? We are adjourned.